Now we'd like to go on to the discussion. First, we would like to invite the discussant, SHOJI Tomotaka, the head of Asia and Africa division. The needs to give us some comments and a question to three speakers.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Hello, friends and colleagues. I'm SHOJI Tomotaka, needs a research fellow on Southeast Asia. Actually, it's my great honor to have a chance to make some comments and questions to three excellent speakers in such an very interesting and important international conference held by NEEDS. I appreciate three excellent speakers for providing us insightful perspectives on the great power rivalry in the Indo-Pacific from three different countries, also three different regions: the Philippines in Southeast Asia, India in South Asia, and Japan in Northeast Asia. One of the important findings given by the three presentations is regarding a common feature that all the three countries are facing a serious security challenge stemming from China. The Philippines has a territorial dispute in the South China Sea. India is concerned about the security of the border areas with China, and Japan has to deal with China's assertiveness in the East China Sea. However, how to cooperate with the US depends on each country. The approaches are different from one another. Japan is the most active in reinforcing security cooperation with the US, both at bilateral and multilateral levels, whereas India is carefully keeping its strategic autonomy, even though it also participates in the US-led multilateral arrangements like the Quad. And the Philippines is reviving security ties with the US as an ally, while emphasizing its non-alignment policy under the new president. With regard to Russia, they are different too. Japan is cooperating closely with the US and Europe in criticizing Russia's invasion and imposing economic sanctions, while India is carefully treating Russia as an important strategic partner. Philippines under Marcos Jr., different from Duterte, seems to be quite indifferent to Moscow. Another contrast is that Jagannath discusses that we should not abruptly draw a parallel between Ukraine and Taiwan, whereas Satake-san mentions that today's Ukraine will be tomorrow's Asia. Overall, this is a natural consequence. The modalities of the great power competition are different in three cases due to differences in terms of threat perception, strategic culture, geopolitical conditions, and historical background. This is quite natural, but very important implication for the US or Japan in thinking about how to cooperate with the regional countries in security. So here, let me make some specific questions to each speaker, one question to each. So firstly, with regard to the Philippines, hello, Ali, how are you? How does Manila deal with the volatile situation in the Taiwan Strait? Of course, although I know that you mentioned a lot about the Taiwan and the Philippines' possible reactions in your presentation, but I'd like you to elaborate again on the possible Philippines' reaction to the Taiwan contingency. The strait is certainly very close, if adjacent to the Philippines territories and the West Philippine Sea. Like Japan, contingency in the strait directly affects security of the Philippines. The United States sees the Philippines strategically important in terms of addressing China's possible aggression against Taiwan, as well as the South China Sea. How do you think the Philippines under Marcos Jr. will respond to China or the United States in case of the possible Taiwan contingency? And I'd like to make the same question to Jagannath. Although I know again, you mentioned a lot about the Taiwan and India's possible reactions. But in your presentation, you discussed that Taiwan's importance is increasing for India. India is participating in US-led multilateral arrangements in terms of addressing the China challenge, while keeping its strategic autonomy, exemplified in its stance toward Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Overall, to what degree will India or should India cooperate with the US and its allies in case of the Taiwan contingency? Will or should India keep its neutrality or provide political support or more like step into military cooperation? And finally, to Japan, I'm interested in economic security and Japan's economic security policy. To what degree can Japan should promote economic security in cooperation with the US? Is there any divergence of interest between the United States and Japan? My sense is that some sort of contradiction seems to be growing. Economic security claims that value chains of strategically important items like semiconductor should be restructured, which means that China should be excluded from those value chains. This policy might be incompatible with a free, fair, and open economic system that Japan supports and has long benefited from. So economic security will affect Japan's economy adversely. How should Japan strike an appropriate balance between security and economy in terms of cooperation with the United States in particular? That's all for my comments and questions. Thank you.
Dr. Shoji, thank you very much. Given the time left, at the maximum, I'd like to give you 4 minutes to each panelist to reply to the question from Dr. Shoji. So in order of the presentation, I'd like to ask each speaker to respond. First of all, Dr. Alge, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shoji. It's nice to see you again. So far, I think the Marcos administration is allowing the US to somehow prepare for any contingency in the Taiwan Strait. And this is why security cooperation and the implementation of EDCA, or the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, has accelerated in the first few months of the Marcos administration. And somehow the Marcos administration also uses the strategic importance that the US is giving to the Philippines at the moment in order to really step up its military modernization program, which is still been ongoing. So therefore, in terms of mutuality of interest, the Marcos administration is quicker in tapping into this. However, the Philippines also is mindful that it is a frontline state in the case of a full-blown Taiwan Strait crisis. The northern part of the frontier of the country is only 100 kilometers from the southern tip of Taiwan. There are around 100,000 Filipino overseas workers in Taiwan. And Taiwan is the 9th trade partner of the Philippines. And of all ASEAN countries, the Philippines has signed all covenants or conventions on refugees and statelessness. So therefore, if there will be a full-blown crisis, invasion, or whatever worst case scenario, and there will be a refugee crisis, the nearest country that they will go to will likely be the northern part of the Philippines. How will Marcos respond in case both the US and China pressures it? It will really depend on the way that both countries approach the Philippines. But I do think at the moment, it seems like the Philippines, given its history, always sides with the United States every time it engages in international conflict. So in terms of history, there is less probability that the Philippines will be neutral on this or will even side with China and not allow its territory and its space to be used by the US, because previous history has proven otherwise.
Thank you very much. And now we would like to get a response from the Dr. Panda.
Yes, I think that's an interesting question by Shoji-san, and lovely to meet you after a gap, Shoji-san. I think Taiwan contingency is a very complicated matter, and no country will be prepared to have a definite game plan. And I think saying that we need a level of plans to deal with the contingency relates to Taiwan. Plan A could be that given the complicated relationship that India shares with China and the working relations with Taiwan, I think India would like to wait and see how other major powers are responding. For example, how US is responding to a PLA occupation on Taiwan. Is US really providing a military assistance? Second, how Japan, Australia, being the Quad members and being from the region, are responding to a PLA occupation on Taiwan. So I think India would like to observe the developments in the regions, how the other major Indo-Pacific partners, like-minded partners, are responding to the situation. That is number one. I think plan B for India could be that India, before committing to support Taiwan and being with Taiwan, India might enter into a negotiation strategy with China, with mainland China, on the boundary dispute. Because as I mentioned, on the boundary dispute, KMT's position is very similar like the KMT's position when KMT established the Taiwan issue. So PLA or China occupying Taiwan means most of the negotiating criteria will be lost from India's point of view. And China will always have an upper hand when it comes to the boundary dispute mechanisms or negotiation strategy. So therefore, India would perhaps be entering into a negotiation strategy with China that here is a case. If you do not really publicly take a position and do not give up your claims on Indian territories, then we might like as well to go to support Taiwan. So therefore, India's plan B would be to enter into a backdoor negotiation channel with China. But at the same time, I think the third option, the plan C, could be also that India might be observing the situation very closely and support the Indo-Pacific narrative and the countries along with the cause of Taiwan, because providing security, providing diplomatic and political support to Taiwan is a critical matter. We know for a fact that there are a lot of Indians are staying in Taiwan. So India's first priority would be to talk to the Chinese and how to rescue the Indian population from Taiwan in the case of a Taiwan contingency plan, and then probably go for a more political support and military support, background military support. If we draw the lessons from the Ukraine war, many countries are not really directly supporting Ukraine, joining Ukraine in terms of fighting against Russia. But there are many countries who are fighting against Russia, staying in the background, providing arms and ammunition to Ukraine. So I think the similar kind of arrangement India would be searching for. So I think Taiwan contingency is a very critical question, and India would like to see how the Indo-Pacific countries, including US, Japan, Australia, are responding to the situation before India responding to the situation of Taiwan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Dr. Satake, please. Thank you for asking. First, regarding the Taiwan issue, just like Dr. Panda, the Russian invasion of Ukraine would not directly lead to China's invasion of Taiwan, because geographically, Taiwan is very different from Ukraine, and for the United States, geopolitical and economic significance of Taiwan is far larger than that of Ukraine. And because of that, the United States has been increasing its military commitment to Taiwan. So from mid to long-term perspective, the situation in Europe will, of course, likely to affect the situation in Asia. If the situation works to Russia's advantage, then the United States will have to reallocate resources to Europe, and that will change the military focus across regions. Also, the Western countries could face assistance fatigue, and that gap or a vacuum will be taken advantage by China, of course. So when we say today's Ukraine could be tomorrow's Asia, this is just an analogy, a rhetorical analogy, but we really have to focus and look at the mid to long-term impact of the war in Ukraine. And regarding economic security, this is not my area of research, so I am not a good person to actually answer on this question. However, for for a national security purpose, if Japan is going to take some economic security issues, then that could run, for example, to protect key infrastructure. If Japan decides to eliminate certain goods produced in certain countries, then this runs counter to the rule of free trade. And this situation could happen going forward a lot. On the other hand, WTO or RCEP was CPTPP. In those frameworks, there were provisions about national security exceptions in order to protect the important national interest, national security interest. If it is absolutely necessary, certain regulations could be justified. That is another aspect. And when it comes to China-US decoupling, this decoupling will not be on full spectrum, but instead it would be a selective decoupling. Therefore, for Japan's part, while trying to be aligned with international rules, Japan will pursue economic security, and that will be done not in a unilateral manner, but that has to be done in the framework of international cooperation. So the regional cooperation or regional rulemaking will be increasingly important going forward. That's it from me. Thank you very much. In the session 2, it seems that we have some time, so if everyone is fine, we'd like to receive questions from the audience. Questions to the three presenters. Changing order, let me start with Dr. Satake, then Dr. Panda, and Dr. Aruge. We are going to ask you additional questions from the audience. And to Dr. Satake, I'm going to paraphrase the questions we received from the audience. From the audience, for example, the sphere of influence, the phrase was used. So when understanding the US-China rivalry, creating a different spheres of influence, is that a right way to see the competition? And when we look at the US-China competition, are there any regions that will have a greater importance going forward? And to Dr. Panda, in your presentation, you said that you recently visited Russia and had discussions with your colleagues in Russia, which was a great opportunity. So if possible, could you share any, if you could share and highlight any interesting discussion points from your discussions with the Russian people, that would be great. And one more thing to Dr. Panda. One China policy, you said that the past presidents had defined one China policy in this is sorry to Dr. Aruge, and you said that different presidents defined one China policy in different manners, and if you could share some example on this point, that would be interesting. Now let me start from Dr. Satake. Sorry about the questions. Let me answer to that. Now, when we think about building international order, there are two ways to think about it. The first one is coordination and collaboration, assuming that there are diverse values, minimum respect for sovereignty and maintenance of rules, and the peaceful resolution of conflicts. While these minimum necessary conditions are met, then we could assume there is one order. That is one approach, and the other is another approach. For example, human rights or a rule of law or democracy, those principles also have to be adopted. This is the second definition of international order, which is adopted by the United States. But in case of Japan, we take a multilateral approach, more inclusive approach. For example, the minimum rule-based order or peaceful resolution of conflicts. That is the stance Japan is taking toward an international order. And in Asia, this kind of inclusive multilateral international order will be more easy to be accepted in Asia. That is how I see. And regarding the region, personally, the Pacific Island nations are the ones I am interested in, because in addition to East China Sea and South China Sea, this is a third battleground where United States and China are competing against each other. Micronesia for the United States and Melanesia for the United States and Polynesia for New Zealand. These are the separate spheres of influence for the three Western countries. But recently, in this area, China's influence is spreading even more. And because of that, the United States is engaged even more in this region. On top of that, instead of the division of rules, a PPP partnership of Pacific parties, they created this kind of collective framework involving Japan, New Zealand, and Great Britain, and India and South Korea have shown interest in this framework. So it's an initiative to pool all assessments, all resources to assess the needs so that more pragmatic and comprehensive benefits can be provided to the entire Pacific Island region. So this kind of collective engagement by democratic countries is going to be more important going forward. That's it from me. Thank you very much. Now let me go to Dr. Panda, please.
On the Russia question, I think there is a lot of debate currently going on within Russia, whether this war has any benefits to the Russian people or not. Because I think there was already, before this war, there was already a lot of talk and debate within Russia about Putin's, ruling the country for such a long time. And there was a lot of dissatisfaction, a lot of public grievances was there already against Putin. Now, Putin deciding to attack Ukraine, not many Russian people understand how effective this attack or war will, be for Russia in terms of strengthening the national security and international posture. So therefore, many Russian scholars, thinkers, privately, they do discuss and they hold the opinion that, Putin is taking the country into a, brink of a major crisis. Of course, Russia is going to economically slow down, facing a huge economic crisis. And many Russian people, they do feel that from now on, Russia is going to be hugely dependent on China. So therefore, I think it is a very negative environment currently within the strategic circuit in Moscow and elsewhere within Russia. The other thing, from Russia's point of view, the Russian scholars are also thinking how they can, execute their foreign policy in times to come when they have lost their face in the European Union. They have complicated their relationship with the US. For Russia, right now, the only strategic options to strengthen the relationship with China and possibly with India and some of the countries in Southeast Asia, if not all. So for Russia, it is a very bargaining and very business-oriented relationship they would be looking at the future. My European colleagues in Sweden and in other parts of Europe, they're continuously asking me about India's approach towards Russia. Let's understand one thing. Why India has a very good partnership with Russia and this nuanced partnership with Russia? It's for specific reasons. India's partnership from Russia is from past, from the period of Soviet Union. And India's partnership with Russia is a conditional partnership. And it is based on 3 to 4 issues. One is that India is purchasing cheap oils. It is a transactional partnership. Russia is not giving India, oil and energy, gas free of cost. So India is purchasing it. Second, India is actually purchasing arms from Soviet Union period from Russia. So it is a historical legacy. So it cannot be changed immediately. It will take another 1 decade to change those, military infrastructure within India to, stop purchasing the arms. But already India is diversifying its military procurement process. Third, I think India needs Russia to balance out China in the multilateral forums. For example, if you see in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, in the AIIB, in the Russia, India, China Trilateral Forum, in the BRICS formulations, both India and China are there along with China, with Russia. So India needs Russia's partnership in order to put a check on China's Belt and Road initiatives to some of the projects. And also, more importantly, the reason fourth, why India needs Russia is primarily because if we do not really partner with Russia, then Russia will obviously strengthen its partnership with China and Pakistan, which will not be good for the region. And Pakistan factor is also another factor why India supports Russia, indirectly, if not directly. Thank you very much.
Okay, in terms of how the Philippines has interpreted the One China policy, bear in mind that even within ASEAN member states have different ways of wording their reaction to the One China policy. The 1975 joint communique between the Philippines and China that restored diplomatic relations under President Marcos Sr., it stated that the Philippines fully understands and respects the position of the Chinese government in terms of the Taiwan issue. But in 2000, in another joint communique, the Philippines have become from merely understanding the One China policy to recognizing that Taiwan is an integral part of China. So over time, it has become less about tolerating Beijing's One China policy, but even adhering to it. However, in the last, in a more recent statement in 2005, the position of the Philippines has been it adheres, which seems that it accepts Beijing's One China policy. But the next sentence is quite indicative, especially if there will be conflict in the Taiwan Strait, and it will be interpreted as aggression on the part of Beijing. The Philippines supports and appreciates China's efforts to resolve the Taiwan issue peacefully. And from the perspective of the Philippines, if the Taiwan Strait will be something that will be aggressively instigated by Beijing, then that will totally have a different interpretation on how the Philippines sees this One China policy, because as we all know, basic in international relations, justice is never on the side of the aggressor.
Thank you also very much for your responses. It was really interesting, and I was just enjoying myself being a listener. I do have 1 minute or so, but it's difficult to have a discussion. So before before the time is up, we would like to conclude our session too. Thank you very much indeed for your very active discussion.